venture behind the lens, and step across the boundaries of conventional narratives. Today, we invite you to bear witness to the powerful, transformative moments that redefined everything we thought we knew.
Hey, put the phone down now. I gave you a direct order.
I'm recording. I have the right.
I don't care about your rights. You're being difficult. Stop yelling.
My kids are right here.
Then maybe you should have thought about that before acting suspicious.
Why is he mad at us?
This isn't right.
Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above as the smell of syrup and bacon filled the late-night air. It was a little after all ends on a Tuesday night, when what was supposed to be a simple family dinner turned into a viral disaster. That night would end up costing people their careers, ruining reputations, and leading to one of the biggest civil rights settlements in restaurant history. The security cameras recorded everything that happened next, and what they captured would shock millions of people and prove that sometimes justice comes with a price that not everyone can afford to pay. Before we get into this unbelievable story, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from tonight. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss how this all unfolds. The family at the center of this situation was made up of 4 people. There was David, a 28-year-old insurance adjuster who worked evenings and was finally heading home. His wife Sarah was a nurse who had just finished a long 12-hour shift at the local hospital. Their daughter Jasmine was 16 years old and had spent the entire evening studying for her SATs. Their youngest, Michael, was teen and had been begging his parents for pancakes all week. They were the kind of family that kept to themselves, paid their bills on time, and treated others with kindness. David coached Little League on weekends. Sarah volunteered at the food bank every other Saturday. Jasmine made the honor roll every semester. Michael collected comic books and dreamed of becoming an astronaut one day. Nothing about them suggested drama or trouble. They were just a hard-working family who wanted some late-night breakfast after a long day. That Tuesday had been especially tiring for everyone. David had handled 3 car accident claims, including one that required him to drive across town in heavy rain to inspect damage. Sarah worked a double shift because 2 nurses called in sick, leaving the hospital short-staffed. Jasmine spent hours studying for a chemistry test, while Michael was full of energy even though it was late. When David finally got home around downtown, the family decided to treat themselves. Sarah suggested going out for a late dinner since no one felt like cooking, and the kids had been talking non-stop about pancakes. The local Waffle House was open 24 hours. The food was affordable, and it gave them a chance to relax together after such a stressful day. They pulled into the restaurant just before the parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few cars from night shift workers and a couple of customers finishing their meals. The neon sign hummed quietly in the cool night air, casting an orange glow over the pavement. Everything felt calm and normal. Inside, the diner had that familiar late-night feel. Soft music played through the speakers. The grill crackled as food cooked. A few customers sat in booths, quietly eating or scrolling on their phones. The night manager, Lisa Rodriguez, stood behind the counter doing paperwork and checking on customers from time to time. The family chose a booth near the back, away from the front windows. They settled in, with Michael quickly grabbing the kids' menu while Sarah helped him choose between chocolate chip pancakes and strawberry waffles. Jasmine pulled out her phone to text her friends about her chemistry test. David looked over the menu, debating whether to stick with his usual hash browns or try something new. Their server arrived within minutes, friendly and professional, and took their drink orders. Coffee for David and Sarah, chocolate milk for Michael, and orange juice for Jasmine. Everything felt relaxed and ordinary. The server mentioned the cook was making a fresh batch of hash browns, so the food might take a little longer. No one minded at all. That, as when Officer Bradley Knox walked through the front door. Knox was a 20-year veteran of the local police department. He was 42 years old, about 6 feet tall, and carried himself with a swagger that some people saw as confidence, while others saw as pure arrogance. He had been patrolling the area that night and decided to stop in for his usual coffee break. The restaurant offered free coffee to law enforcement, a sign of appreciation that most officers didn't take advantage of. Knox, however, had a different attitude toward this place. He saw it as part of his territory, somewhere he could watch people and make sure only the right kind were around. Knox ordered his regular black coffee at the counter and sat at the bar facing the dining area. From there, he had a clear view of everyone inside. He nodded at the night manager, who knew him well, and began scanning the room. His eyes moved slowly from table to table, studying each customer with a look that made even innocent people feel uncomfortable. When his gaze landed on David's family, something changed. He stared longer than necessary, his jaw tightening slightly. He took a slow sip of his coffee and kept watching them, trying to appear casual. The family had no idea they were being watched. They were busy talking about Jasmine's upcoming SATs and Michael's latest fascination with space. Sarah shared a story about a difficult patient she'd cared for that day, while David laughed about a strange insurance claim he had handled. About 15 minutes later, their food arrived. The server set down hot plates of pancakes, waffles, eggs, and hash browns. The portions were large, and everything looked great. Michael immediately dug into his chocolate chip pancakes. Jasmine carefully cut her waffle into neat squares. David and Sarah shared their hash browns while talking about their day. For the next 20 minutes, everything stayed normal. They ate, laughed at Michael's jokes, and helped Jasmine review chemistry formulas. Customers came and went. The night manager continued her work. Officer Knox sat at the counter, occasionally glancing their way, but mostly focused on his phone and coffee. Then something changed. Knox finished his coffee, and instead of leaving like usual, he stood up and walked toward their table. His hand rested casually on his belt near his radio. His face looked serious and official, the kind of expression that instantly makes people nervous, even when they've done nothing wrong. David noticed him first and straightened up without thinking. Sarah looked up from talking to Jasmine and immediately felt a sense of unease. The kids kept eating, completely unaware of the tension that had suddenly settled around their table. Knox stopped right next to their booth and looked down at the family with a face that showed no friendliness at all. He didn't introduce himself or explain why he was there. Instead, he just stood silently, creating an awkward pause that felt uncomfortably long. Finally, David spoke up and politely asked if there was something the officer needed. His voice was calm and respectful, the voice of someone who believed that staying cooperative was the safest way to deal with police. He had always taught his children to be polite, to follow instructions, and to never do anything that could make a situation worse. Knox answered in a cold, sharp tone. He claimed that he had received reports of suspicious activity inside the restaurant and needed to check on it. This was the first lie of the night, though the family had no way of knowing that at the time. There had been no reports and no suspicious behavior. Knox was acting on his own for reasons that would slowly become clear. Sarah asked what kind of suspicious activity he was talking about, her medical background making her naturally curious about details. Knox ignored her question and instead demanded David identification. When David calmly asked why ID was required just for eating dinner, Knox's attitude immediately became more aggressive. Other customers started to notice what was happening. Conversations died down as people turned toward the booth, watching a police officer question a family who appeared to be doing nothing wrong. Behind the counter, the night manager Lisa looked up from her paperwork and began paying close attention. Knox then demanded identification from all 4 family members, including the children. The request was unusual and legally questionable, but David decided it was better to cooperate than argue. He handed over his driver's license. Sarah pulled hers from her purse. Jasmine showed her student ID, and Michael, being only 10 years old, had nothing to give. Knox examined each ID slowly, taking far more time than necessary to look over basic information. He started asking questions about where they lived, where they worked, and why they were out so late. Each question felt more personal than the last, and the family began to understand that this was not a normal interaction. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt you were being treated unfairly but didn't know how to respond? If so, type yes in the comments. By now, other diners were openly staring. Some looked concerned and sympathetic, while others seemed uncomfortable and unsure whether to get involved or stay quiet. The mood in the restaurant had completely shifted. What had once felt calm and relaxed was now tense, with an uneasy energy filling the room. Knox's questions became even more intrusive. He asked about their income, whether they had a criminal history, and if they had ever been arrested. When David pointed out that these questions did seem appropriate for a family simply having dinner, Knox's behavior turned openly hostile. That was when the night manager decided to step in. Lisa Rodriguez had worked the night shift at this Waffle House for 8 years. She had dealt with drunk customers, rude teenagers, and all kinds of difficult situations. But what she was seeing at that booth made her feel sick. She knew Officer Knox from his regular visits and had always thought of him as professional, even if he was distant. This behavior was nothing like what she had seen before. Lisa walked over, her manager's badge clearly visible, and asked with a friendly smile if everything was okay with their meal. Her voice was warm, but her eyes were focused and alert, carefully reading the situation. Knox turned toward her with clear irritation and told her this was police business and that she needed to go back behind the counter. Lisa didn't back down. Calmly and respectfully, she explained that as the manager on duty, it was her responsibility to make sure customers felt safe and comfortable in her restaurant. David looked at her with gratitude. Finally, someone else could see that something was right. Sarah reached under the table and gently squeezed David's hand, silently showing her support. The kids kept eating, but it was clear they were starting to realize that something was wrong. Knox stepped closer to Lisa, invading her personal space just like he had done with the family. He warned her that he was conducting an investigation, and that interfering could lead to charges against her and the restaurant. Lisa had handled plenty of tough situations in her career, but she had never been threatened by a police officer simply for doing her job. The tension in the restaurant was now impossible to ignore. Every customer was watching. Some had taken out their phones, though they weren't recording yet. Others whispered quietly. Even the cook in the back sensed something was off and kept looking through the service window. Lisa asked Knox if they could step aside and talk privately, away from the dining area. She suggested moving somewhere quieter to discuss whatever issue he had. Knox refused. He said anything that needed to be said could be said right there in front of everyone. His voice grew louder and more aggressive with every word. That is, when David made a choice that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and began recording. He did try to hide it. He held the phone openly, making sure the camera captured Knox and everything around them. The moment Knox saw the phone, the situation escalated fast. He immediately ordered David to put it away. David calmly explained that he had the right to record a public official doing their job in a public place. Knox stepped even closer, his hand moving toward his weapon. He repeated the order, this time with clear threat in his voice. Sarah instinctively moved, placing herself between the officer and her children. Jasmine looked terrified, and Michael stared in confusion, not understanding why the police officer was being so mean to his family. Other customers started pulling out their phones too, sensing that they were witnessing something that needed to be recorded. Lisa stepped forward again, this time with more confidence in her voice. She told Knox that the family wasn't bothering anyone and had every right to enjoy their meal without being harassed. She added that if he truly had police business to handle, he should take it outside her restaurant. Knox immediately turned his anger toward her, accusing her of interfering with a police investigation. The situation was spinning out of control fast. What began as a quiet family dinner had turned into a confrontation no one had asked for or caused. David kept his phone steady, continuing to record while trying to stay calm for the sake of his children. Sarah struggled to hold back tears, overwhelmed by fear and frustration. Knox suddenly reached for David's arm, clearly trying to stop him from recording. David pulled away and firmly stated that he did not consent to being touched. He asked what crime he was being accused of and on what legal grounds he was being detained. Knox couldn't give a clear answer to either question. That's when Lisa made a choice that would change everything. She turned and walked back to the counter, picking up the restaurant phone. Knox demanded to know what she was doing. Lisa looked him straight in the eye and said she was calling the police department to request a supervisor. Knox's face immediately went pale. The other customers realized they were witnessing something serious. Several people were now openly recording. An elderly man stood up and loudly announced that he was a witness to everything happening. A young woman spoke up, saying the family had done nothing wrong and should be left alone. Knox was now in a situation he had never expected. He thought the family would be scared into silence. He assumed other customers would mind their own business. He believed the restaurant staff would automatically respect his authority. Instead, he was surrounded by people calling him out and documenting his behavior. Sarah finally spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. Even though she was afraid, her voice stayed steady. She said her family had only come to eat dinner and had done nothing to deserve this treatment. She pointed out that they had cooperated fully and answered every question. Then she asked why they were being treated like criminals. Knox's reply revealed the real reason behind his action. He said that people like them did belong in nice places like this. He claimed their kind brought trouble wherever they went, and that he was only trying to keep the peace. His words hung in the air like poison. In that moment, his true motivation became clear to everyone in the room. The restaurant fell silent, except for the quiet sound of phones recording. Everyone now understood this had nothing to do with suspicious activity or police work. This was about a racist officer who could stand seeing a successful black family enjoying a meal in what he believed was his territory. Lisa's call to the police department was answered quickly. She explained that an officer in her restaurant was harassing customers without cause and creating a disturbance. The dispatcher asked for Knox's badge number, which Lisa requested directly from him. Knox refused, claiming he did have to identify himself to civilian staff. David, still recording, calmly said Knox's badge number out loud. He had noticed it earlier when the officer first approached the table. Knox spun around, furious that his identity was now being shared. He accused David of being a troublemaker and claimed his attitude was the reason police attention had been drawn to him. The supervisor who received Lisa's call was Lieutenant Patricia Johnson, a 20-year veteran who had dealt with many problem officers before. When she heard Knox's badge number, she recognized it immediately. Knox had been the subject of multiple complaints over the past 2 years, all involving interactions with minority citizens. None had led to serious punishment, but they formed a troubling pattern that Johnson had been watching closely. She told the dispatcher she would respond personally and requested additional units to ensure the situation did get worse. Within minutes, 3 police cars were on their way to the Waffle House. The officers inside them had no idea they were about to arrive at a moment that would be captured on camera and change everything. Back inside the restaurant, Knox was growing desperate. He could feel control slipping away. The family stayed calm despite his aggression. The manager stood firm beside them. Other customers openly criticized his behavior. Everything he expected to happen was falling apart. Michael, who had quietly eaten his pancakes through most of the confrontation, finally spoke. In the innocent voice of a 10-year-old, he asked his father why the policeman was being so mean to them. David knelt down to his son's level and gently explained that sometimes adults make mistakes and that everything would be okay. That simple moment, caught on video, would later become one of the most powerful parts of the footage. A child as confusion, a father as dignity under pressure, and a family's quiet strength in the face of injustice were all captured in just a few heartbreaking seconds. Knox heard Michael's question and David's answer. For a brief moment, the child's innocence seemed to cut through his anger. He looked around and appeared to realize how many people were watching, how many cameras were recording his every move. But instead of backing down or apologizing, he doubled down. He announced loudly that he was a police officer doing his job, and that anyone who didn't like it could file a complaint. He claimed he had every right to question suspicious individuals and said the family's reaction only proved his suspicions. Lisa had heard enough. Lisa stepped forward decisively and walked straight up to Knox. She told him his behavior was completely unacceptable and that he needed to leave her restaurant immediately. She made it clear that the family was welcome to stay and finish their meal in peace, but he was no longer welcome on the premises. Knox stared at her in disbelief, clearly shocked that a restaurant manager would dare tell a police officer to leave. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing moment. Knox's backup was arriving, but so was his supervisor. The next few minutes would determine whether this tense standoff would end quietly or explode into something much bigger. David continued recording, keeping his phone steady and fully charged, ready to capture whatever came next. Sarah stayed close to the children, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. Lisa stood firm behind the counter, prepared to explain the situation to whoever arrived first. None of them could have predicted that within 48 hours, David's video would be watched over 3 million times. Within a week, it would spark national discussions about racial profiling, police accountability, and the rights of private businesses to protect their customers. Within 6 months, it would result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in restaurant history. But for now, they simply waited, listening to the sirens grow louder while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh glow on a scene that would change all their lives forever. The first police cruiser to arrive belonged to Officer James Mitchell, a 5-year veteran who had worked with Knox before. Mitchell entered the restaurant expecting to help with a routine disturbance call. But what he saw stunned him. The restaurant was completely silent except for the hum of refrigerators and the occasional beep from the kitchen. Every customer was staring at the back booth, where Knox loomed over. A black family who appeared to be simply trying to eat their dinner. Multiple phones were pointed at the scene, recording every moment. The tension in the air was thick and heavy. Mitchell approached Knox, confusion written clearly on his face, and asked what was happening and why so many civilians were recording. Knox tried to explain that he was investigating suspicious behavior, but his words came out defensive and jumbled. Mitchell looked around, struggling to see how a family eating pancakes and waffles could possibly be suspicious. Lisa quickly walked over to Mitchell and introduced herself as the night manager. Calmly and professionally, she explained that Knox had been harassing a family who had done nothing wrong, that she had asked him to leave, and that she wanted the family to finish their meal in peace. Her tone was steady, measured, and authoritative, the voice of someone used to handling difficult situations. Mitchell suggested speaking to Knox privately outside, but Knox refused, insisting everything was under control and that Mitchell should focus on the crowd of onlookers. Mitchell wasn't convinced. With his experience, he could immediately recognize when a situation had gone off the rails, and this one clearly had. David continued recording, making sure to capture both officers and the unfolding scene. His phone had been on video mode since the confrontation began, and he kept it steady despite his nerves. The timestamp on his phone showed that nearly 40 minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. Sarah noticed Jasmine starting to shake. The teenager had been trying to stay strong, but the arrival of multiple police officers was increasing her anxiety. Sarah gently rubbed her daughter's back, whispering reassurances that they would be going home soon. Michael had finished his pancakes and now colored quietly on the kids' menu with the crayons provided. The second police car arrived just as Mitchell tried to convince Knox to step outside. Officer Rebecca Torres had been patrolling a different area when she heard the call. She knew Knox by reputation, which wasn't entirely positive. Torres immediately assessed the situation. The family in the booth looked uncomfortable but composed. Knox stood agitated and defensive. The manager remained professional but visibly frustrated, and other customers were recording the entire scene on their phones. Without speaking to Knox, Torres walked directly to the family's table. She introduced herself politely and asked if everyone was okay. David looked up with cautious relief. Finally, an officer who seemed to understand that something was wrong. Sarah nodded, saying they were fine but confused about why they were being questioned. Torres asked David to explain everything from the beginning. Still holding his phone to record, he gave a clear account. They had come for a late dinner after long days at work. Knox approached their table unprovoked, asked invasive questions, and became increasingly aggressive. Knox interrupted, claiming the family's account was biased, and that Torres should focus on their supposed uncooperativeness. Torres looked at him with barely concealed irritation and asked what specific crime he was investigating and what evidence justified questioning the family. Knox rambled, mentioning suspicious behavior without describing it and talking about maintaining order without explaining what disorder he had observed. Lisa stepped forward and confronted Knox directly. She told him that his behavior was completely unacceptable and that he needed to leave her restaurant immediately. She made it clear that the family was welcome to stay and finish their meal in peace, but he was no longer allowed on the premises. Knox stared at her in disbelief, shocked that a restaurant manager would dare tell a police officer to leave. In the distance, sirens grew louder. Backup was arriving, but so was his supervisor. The next few minutes would determine whether the situation would be resolved quietly or explode into something far bigger. David kept recording, his phone fully charged and steady, ready to capture everything. Sarah held the children close, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. Lisa stood firm behind the counter, ready to explain the situation to whoever arrived first. None of them could have predicted that within 48 hours, David's video would reach over 3 million views. Within a week, it would spark national conversations about racial profiling, police accountability, and the rights of private businesses to protect their customers. Within 6 months, it would lead to one of the largest civil rights settlements in restaurant history. But for now, they waited, listening to the sirens and the humming fluorescent lights above, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The first police cruiser belonged to Officer James Mitchell, a 5-year veteran who had worked with Knox before. Mitchell walked into the restaurant expecting a routine disturbance, but what he saw left him stunned. The restaurant was silent except for the hum of refrigerator and the occasional beep from the kitchen. Every customer's eyes were on the back booth, where Knox stood over a black family trying to finish dinner. Phones were recording every moment. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Mitchell approached Knox, confused, and asked what was happening and why so many people were recording. Knox tried to explain he was investigating suspicious behavior, but his words were defensive and jumbled. Mitchell looked around, struggling to see how a family eating pancakes and waffles could be suspicious. Lisa quickly stepped in, introducing herself as the night manager. Calmly and professionally, she explained that Knox had been harassing a family who had done nothing wrong, that she had asked him to leave, and that she wanted the family to finish their meal in peace. Mitchell suggested speaking to Knox privately outside, but Knox refused, insisting everything was under control and that Mitchell focus on the onlookers. Mitchell wasn't convinced. He could recognize when a situation had gone off the rails, and this was clearly one of those times. David continued recording, making sure to capture both officers and the scene. Nearly 40 minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. Sarah noticed Jasmine starting to shake and quietly comforted her, while Michael colored on the kids' menu, seemingly oblivious. The second police car arrived with Officer Rebecca Torres, who knew Knox's reputation wasn't spotless. She assessed the situation immediately: a tense family, an aggressive officer, professional but frustrated manager, and other customers recording everything. Torres went directly to the family, politely introducing herself and asking if they were okay. David gave a cautious sigh of relief, and Sarah explained they were fine but confused. Torres asked David to explain everything from the start. David calmly recounted their evening, coming for a late dinner, Knox's unprovoked approach, invasive questions, and escalating aggression. Knox interrupted, claiming bias, but Torres calmly asked for specifics on what crime he was investigating and what evidence justified his behavior. Knox rambled without clear answers. He referenced his experience and instincts but offered no real justification. Torres had enough. She firmly told Knox that she was taking over and that he should return to his patrol car. Knox began to protest, but Torres cut him off, explaining that as the senior officer, she was de-escalating the situation to let the family finish their meal in peace. Then the third police car arrived. Lieutenant Samuel Rodriguez, an 18-year veteran and Knox's supervisor for the past 3 years, stepped out. He had been tracking complaints about Knox and knew he needed to respond personally. Rodriguez entered, immediately took control, spoke briefly with Torres and Mitchell, then turned to Knox. When Knox launched into his usual rambling defense, Rodriguez stopped him mid-sentence with a hand gesture. Then, to everyone's surprise, he walked to David's table and apologized on behalf of the police department. He said the family had been treated unfairly, assured them there would be consequences, and told them they were free to finish their meal. David finally lowered his phone. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief. Jasmine noticed approving smiles from other customers, and Michael asked if they could order dessert now that the mean officer was gone. Rodriguez escorted Knox outside, where Knox argued and gestured wildly, refusing to accept he had done anything wrong. Lisa approached the family, offering a warm smile, telling them their meal would be complimentary, and providing a business card for a civil rights attorney. David thanked her for her courage in standing up to Knox. Other customers approached, offering support and expressing outrage at what they had seen. Torres and Mitchell stayed another 20 minutes, taking statements and making sure the family felt safe. Torres gave David her business card and encouraged him to file a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. She promised a full investigation and appropriate discipline for Knox. Outside, Rodriguez had the hardest conversation of Knox's career. He told Knox he was suspended. Immediately pending investigation, his police powers revoked, and his badge and weapon confiscated. Knox argued and blamed political pressure, but Rodriguez stayed firm. Suspension was immediate. The family finally finished their meal around 1 a.m. Michael shared chocolate ice cream with his sister. David and Sarah sipped coffee, processing everything, and discussed legal action. Jasmine, who had been quiet most of the night, insisted they make sure Knox couldn't hurt another family. Her parents were struck by her maturity and sense of justice. As they prepared to leave, Lisa handed David another business card for a civil rights attorney and reminded him that the restaurant's cameras had preserved the entire incident. David uploaded his video to social media before they even got home. He didn't expect much attention, just wanted evidence preserved. By morning, the video had over 50,000 views. By noon, nearly 200,000. Local news called for interviews. The restaurant's corporate office praised Lisa and condemned discrimination. Knox sat in Internal Affairs, facing clear footage of his actions. Within 2 weeks, Knox was terminated, lost his pension, and the family's civil rights lawsuit resulted in a $2.1 million settlement, funding police bias training programs. Lisa was promoted to regional manager for her bravery. Standing up to injustice had changed everything, and sometimes silence costs far more than courage. This case was brutal.
Documents and official records are the absolute foundation of our history, framing the stories that shape our reality. Every story is a relentless pursuit of genuine truth. Thank you for dedicating your valuable time to investigate these truths with us.